I'm so honored. I couldn't get my wires all untangled for my headphones, so we're going to help. We're going to need help. Richard Hudson, U.S. Congressman, who was my campaign manager in 2008. I would have been governor in 2008 had I had a decent campaign manager, Congressman Hudson. Now, do you want to say your line?
Well, if you're a better candidate, it wouldn't have taken 2 runs to get you there.
You see, we've been having this fight for a long time.
You're going to fit in on this show just fine.
We're honored to have Richard Hudson and one of my old staff members, Billy Costangian, here. Billy, glad to have you in the studio, and they've bought me off. I've been paid off in this studio. If this were TV, daggum, we'd be arrested right now. But Richard Hudson brought donuts in. Where did you bring the donuts in?
Well, we've got some from Downtown Donuts in Concord, and we have the old staple Krispy Kreme here for National Donut Day.
I came up into the parking lot today. They were sitting there with donuts. I hijacked the donuts, said, come on in.
We're
glad to have you here, Congressman. So the big news for today, Bo Thompson.
Well, the big news is the guest list. Already in studio we have Congressman Hudson coming up at 8:35. Bill O'Reilly going to join us.
Bill O'Reilly. We got some big news about Bill O'Reilly and also Pat McCrory with Bill O'Reilly. We're going to be talking about that in the future also. So Bill O'Reilly coming down at 8:35.
Next hour, 1 hour from right now, we'll go from congressman to senator as Senator Thom Tillis going to call in. You got the big GOP state convention this weekend.
Fantastic. In fact, I'm giving a speech there at 1 o'clock. I'm going to have Richard help write my speech like the old days, and then whenever he writes my speech, I never read it anyway. Isn't that right, Richard Hudson?
That's right, and I brought a napkin. We'll write the speech out here before I leave.
The good old days.
And also next hour, no strangers to these airwaves over the years, Shelby and Stuart Stout, the parents of the late Hope Stout. They'll be in our weekly You Can Make a Difference hero segment at 9:35.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking about how maybe the movie studios, Hollywood, is kind of ripping them off. And Hollywood's causing a lot of problems in Georgia and North Carolina and with national politics. And now they're trying to really impact a family that's seen enough loss. So we're honored to have the Stout family come to our studios. And for all of you who get mad that I have the host of Meet the Press,
Chuck Todd.
Chuck Todd, he's not going to be here today for all you haters of Chuck Todd, but we love having Chuck Todd every Friday, but he's off this Friday, so you're going to get a break, but instead we're going to have Bill O'Reilly.
That's right. Bill O'Reilly coming up at 8:35 this hour. Headlines on a Friday morning. Vice President Mike Pence says he is encouraged by Mexico's latest proposals to head off tariffs by stepping up efforts to halt illegal immigration over the southern border. But Pence does say at this point tariffs are still set to take effect coming up on Monday.
Congressman Hudson, what do you say about that? Do you think this is going to work? I think it's a brilliant move.
I agree. Mexico's got to do their part. If your neighbor's tree is growing over your yard and it threatens your house, your neighbor needs to cut that limb. We've got our neighbors below us who are not doing their part. They're allowing people to come through their country to get to our country. It's not right, and I think the president's right in calling them to account.
What an analogy. That's incredible. A tree coming into your neighbor's house tree. No, that's not what he said. He said it better than that. That is a great analogy. Got a big limb hanging over my yard. The neighbor's got to take care of it. But this is more than a limb. This is a lot of people coming in cars, coming on top of trains with no help from the Mexican government whatsoever.
Absolutely. We have a true humanitarian crisis. We had 1,000 people crossing one day recently, and we frankly our folks are overwhelmed. We can't provide the proper amount of medical aid and care for these folks. It is a humanitarian crisis, regardless of how you feel about the immigration laws. We just can't sustain the type of flow of illegal immigration.
Well, at least Nancy Pelosi has called it now a crisis. And speaking of Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah, President Trump did an interview with Laura Ingraham last night. This is part of it's the conclusion of his trip overseas as part of the D-Day commemoration yesterday. But he sat down with Ingraham on Fox News, and here's a bit of what he had to say about Nancy Pelosi and what she's been saying About him.
Yeah.
I think she's a disgrace. I actually don't think she's a talented person. I've tried to be nice to her because I would have liked to have gotten some deals done. She's incapable of doing deals. She's a nasty, vindictive, horrible person. The Mueller report came out. It was a disaster for them. They thought their good friend Bobby Mueller was going to give them a great report, and he came out with a report with 13 horrible, angry Democrats who were totally biased against me. A couple of them worked for Hillary Clinton. They then added 5 more, also Democrats. With all of that, 2.5 years, think of it, from before I even got elected, they've been going after me, and they have nothing.
Do you mind if he testifies still before you said you didn't care? Mueller testified.
Let me tell you. He made such a fool out of himself the last time because what people don't report is the letter he had to do to straighten out his testimony, because his testimony was wrong. But Nancy Pelosi, I call her Nervous Nancy, Nancy Pelosi doesn't talk about it. Nancy Pelosi's a disaster. Okay?
All right, so that's a bit of what he said.
I think he's really responding to Nancy Pelosi saying that the president should be in jail. We've had a Speaker of the House tell the president that he ought to be in jail, and it supposedly leaked out. Richard, you weren't in that meeting because that was the Democratic caucus. You're now in the minority.
Right. Well, you know, the great thing about Donald Trump, I mean, I, on the one hand, I probably would say things differently than he does a lot. But on the other hand, he says what all of us sitting at home in our living rooms watching TV want to say or do say. And I think that's part of why people love Donald Trump is he says what we feel. And in this case, look, there was a witch hunt. There was this huge investigation, and we need to find out what the source of that investigation was, because, frankly, it's scary to think that the entire apparatus of the federal law enforcement could make up an investigation.
Donald Trump's greatest strength is he has no filter. His greatest weakness, he has no filter. And guess what? For the next hour and a half right here on the Pat McCrory Show, no filter.
No acronyms, no filter.
And you're hopped up on sugar from all the donuts.
I am dying.
There's definitely not a donut shortage.
I've got to have some diabetic problem because this sugar in this studio is killing me. But that won't stop us. Charles has got my the cut man's in the corner to keep me alive for the next 2 hours.
There's only one thing to do when you're hopped up on sugar like this. Add a little Bill O'Reilly to it.
Bill O'Reilly coming up, and more of Richard Hudson.
That's right. We'll continue with the Congressman live here in studio right after John Stokes. Right after.
On News Talk 1110, 99.3 WPT.
The Richard Hudson theme.
Although we're going to have conversation. A lot of it right now.
Oh, I thought we were just going to play that song and have no conversation whatsoever.
Well, actually, it's your show. We can do that.
Richard Hudson, when you're in the minority, you were in the majority when the Republicans were in control. Sadly, the Republicans lost control. Nancy Pelosi is Speaker of the House. Tell us the difference for a U.S. congressman about being in the minority and then in the majority. Because on this show, we tell them what the audience doesn't know about. And they really don't realize the difference of being in the majority and the minority in the House of Representatives.
Well, it's a huge difference, Governor, because the majority in the House controls everything. And so they determine which bills get considered in committee, which bills get voted on the floor. You know, I may have a great idea, but unless I get a Democrat to work with me, that idea is never going to see the light of day. Which for me is not as big a difference because my approach from the beginning of this job has always been, let's solve problems. Let's go identify problems for my folks here at home, and let's go find Democrats that will work with me on it. And so, you know, as a freshman, President Obama signed 4 of my bills into law because I started by bringing a Democrat in to work with me to solve the problem. And so for me personally, it hasn't changed as much, but in terms of the agenda and what issues we get to debate and what things we get to vote on, it's a huge difference.
Well, I've always seen you to be that type of person. In fact, there's a bill you're working on right now which helps a military veteran that's going through some very difficult problems within your district.
Absolutely. There's a veteran named Richard Stacegill who serves at Fort Bragg. He's deployed multiple times, a true American hero. And he and his wife, Megan, came to visit me last year. And the case here is that the Army hospital at Fort Bragg missed a diagnosis on lung cancer. And they just absolutely missed a spot on his lungs in a scan. if they had caught it, we could have treated it. But now he's got stage 3 terminal lung cancer because of a medical malpractice. But because of the Ferris Doctrine, our soldiers aren't allowed to sue. And the Ferris Doctrine Act is a good thing when it comes to combat and training. But I've got bipartisan legislation now that says if it's a non-combat, non-training medical malpractice, our soldiers and their families ought to have the same civil rights as everybody else.
You know, speaking of Fayetteville and Fort Bragg, which is a part of your district, and you've always had interest in the military, we had a lot of floods during the end of my term, October of 2016, and the current governor, Cooper, has yet to spend almost any of that money that we got him from the federal government for hurricane relief. And now we've had another hurricane called Florence, in which a lot of your constituents in your district are still recovering from. What in the heck is going on in the state of North Carolina where they're not spending the federal money, CBDG funds, for helping people get housing again?
It's a great question, and it is something that I don't understand. And you know, in a bipartisan way, our congressional delegation, Republicans and Democrats, have continued to go to the governor and go to the state and say exactly what you've said. We've appropriated the funds. We're still trying to recover from 2 storms ago.
Right.
But the money from that storm hasn't even gone out, let alone the money for this most recent storm. We passed another emergency supplemental just last week to get more funds available here in North Carolina, but the funds are not flowing.
And sooner or later, the feds are going to go, why give you any money in North Carolina if the governor doesn't spend what you got?
Absolutely. And you know, but the bottom line is we've got people still displaced from their homes, folks still trying to restore their businesses, and they need the help.
And this is personal for me because I saw firsthand the disaster a day after the hurricane. Actually, it was a week and a half hurricane hitting the entire state, primarily many parts of your district. And I mean, these people, it's the poorest of the poor that were impacted the most.
Absolutely.
And they just had no help to get back on their feet, and they're still getting no hope. And in fact, at 1 o'clock today at the convention, that might be one subject I talk about on behalf of the flood victims of Hurricane Florence and Hurricane Matthews.
Well, there's some issues that transcend politics and just competent government, delivery of service, helping people in time of need. That's something, whether you're Republican or Democrat, we ought to demand from our government.
Speaking of the North Carolina Republican Party, there's a big convention starting today at 1 o'clock in Concord. In fact, I'm going to be one of the first speakers there. I don't know if anyone will be in the room when I speak.
On the way here down from Concord, I saw a huge line forming with Pat McCrory.
Going the other
Please
way.
Run again signs. So it should be a big crowd for you.
Big traffic jam in your old town of Concord.
It looked like race weekend. It was pretty amazing.
You're good. You are good. What's the message for the North Carolina Republican Party? I mean, my major concern is we've lost Durham, Raleigh, Charlotte, Greensboro. The sheriffs aren't cooperating with ICE at this point in time. I mean, that's the message we're sending Washington, D.C., that North Carolina is a sanctuary state now.
No, I have a secret strategy for how we get more women and minorities to vote for Republicans. It's going to be very complicated. We're going to have to roll this thing out over several weeks. But the strategy is talk to them. Talk to them. We need to do a better job of making our case as the Republican Party of what we're for and what we'll do if you give us the majority in the House again. It's not enough to be against the craziness that you see that's happening up there. We also have to affirmatively say, here's what we'll do, and here's why it matters to your life.
And probably part 2 of that I would add, listen to their responses.
Amen. Absolutely.
As Aldona Voss once told me, my Secretary of Health and Human Services, she said, Pat, when a woman asks you a question, I did several women's forums, and she said, Governor, when they ask you a question, will you let them finish the question before you start answering it? And when you do answer, will you answer the question that they asked? By the way, that doesn't just revolve around political life. That revolves around our personal life. The best advice I've ever gotten regarding communications, and that's a good lesson for all of us, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, and especially all politicians. Richard Hudson, you're a man of the people. This has been a good conversation.
It's been a pleasure to be here, Governor.
Good to see you. A man who went to high school right here in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Myers Park High School. Go Mustangs.
Next 2 of us.
And now he's a U.S. congressman. And Bo Thompson, is the Thompson radio. Together in one studio, and coming up, Bill O'Reilly.
Who did not graduate from Myers Park High School.
It's kind of like the Jonas Brothers reunion right here. You know?
That's right. Question is, who's number 3? We head back to the news center ahead of Bill O'Reilly here on WBT. Here's John Stokes. WBT, here's